All right, so welcome into the live stream today. We're going to be jumping into Bitcoin, Ethereum, also how Bitcoin payments and the Lightning Network may be coming together. There's both a good side and a not so good side to this. So I want to kind of give you the good news, bad news kind of scenario. We'll break into all that stuff. My name is Paul Barron. Welcome back into TechPath today. All right, so one of the things that we do here on this show, of course, if you're new to crypto, maybe you're new to our show, first thing is we'd love for you to be a subscriber, so it's just really easy. The good thing is you're going to get notified of live streams just like this. It'll go into your own queue, and the beautiful algos of YouTube will do its work and get you this stuff at the right time. So hopefully you're ahead of the game when all this information drops. Typically what we like to do here on the show is give you a breakdown of our own internal research, then a little bit of our own analysis and opinion, and then we'll layer in some of our own data to back all this stuff. Remember, all of these are market movers. Market movers work pretty simple. They basically do that, give you the data, the insights, the opinion, give you a little bit of our own inside data from the power index, and not investment advice, but hopefully it gets you guys going in the right direction. Let's get into a few of the articles here that kind of break down one, where the Lightning Network is really becoming a very important component within Bitcoin. And I think more so, this is going to become even more so important as we start to see the merge of Ethereum play into this. And I'll explain all this and kind of how it comes together. But there's a few things here. First story, OpenNode launches a cart to launch Bitcoin payments for e-commerce companies. Now, most people would look at this and say, all right, well, this is just a payment platform. And if you know Launchcart, you probably have seen it out there. It's one of the more advanced, I think one of the more advanced services that provides all sorts of payment systems for e-commerce and online, offerings. So when you have these kinds of scenarios taking place, it starts to, one, set the tone for the masses, which are realizing for the first time that you can take Bitcoin on your e-commerce store, and for all those customers that are starting to go, wait a minute, I can pay with Bitcoin. So that is something that really is pretty significant. So they partnered with Launchcart, enable e-commerce business to accept Bitcoin payments. Launchcart obviously is a SaaS provider dedicated to kind of giving this available out there to everyone. If you look at their own website, Launchcart, right there on the top banner, they've got it now. So now accepting Bitcoin payments from your Launchcart store. So you can do this. And they've got 30,000 store owners that are going to be able to utilize this. Most likely they'll pick up more. 2 million products, 300 plus ready to sell products. And I think this is just the beginning of how we see more and more of these kinds of products and services that will launch native Bitcoin payments within these platforms. Big deal, because it does start to streamline this and make it much more understandable, I think, from a sense of a layman who's just getting into cryptocurrency, or maybe they never had even thought about buying Bitcoin or even getting into Bitcoin, but now they realize they can pay with it. So big factor here. This was a tweet that came over from Coinbase. And I want to showcase this a little bit here. Payment activity on the Bitcoin Lightning Network is up over 4 times its position last year. So if successful, Lightning can disrupt $150 billion per year payment industry, but will it? That's a big question we've asked on this show before. If you look at just some of the apps that are in here, both on the reward side, let me zoom out, let me kind of highlight that, just zoom out a little bit there. Rewards and earnings, gaming, podcasts and streaming. We've had the podcast guys on Podcast 2.0 on this show. Wallets, neobanks, which I think are the ones that are going to be the ones that really kind of do take us to the next level. Payment solutions, one like we just gave you guys an example. Banking as a service, I think, will also be another big area where Lightning will start to play into this. And again, it's very early, but at the same time, there's a lot of good signs here. And again, all of this plays into the power of Bitcoin and how Bitcoin can be utilized. Now, there is argument against this, and I'll present that case because it's not all sunny and roses for the Lightning Network and Bitcoin. Just in though, Lightning Network capacity hits its all-time high of over 4,500 Bitcoin. I think this is a good scaling indicator. I still don't necessarily think this is that large in comparison to the overall payment ecosystem that happens online, and much less in other real life situations. I think retail has still got a long way to go before we start to really see this implemented in a big way. But the fact that they're getting it, and I say they, the Lightning Network in general, is getting to some level of scale, any kind of positivity in this area in terms of utilizing Lightning for payments is a good thing. Strike, of course, when you look at Strike and Jack Mallers and what they've been able to do, obviously the company and the wallet that pretty much implemented Bitcoin into El Salvador, a Visa card with real rewards for the real world. You can now take Stripe anywhere and earn rewards on everyday spending. And again, I think this is a good move, but again, we've seen several of these kinds of neo-style credit debit card products out there. The question will be, how many people actually jump into this, and is it effective, and what are some of the reward programs that play out into this? So all that will, I think, play out in a little bit. But the fact that they're offering this is a good thing. I think this is a good, a definite good push for Lightning. Here's a video that kind of showcases, let me kind of bring this one out a little bit so you guys can kind of see it. So this is a video that just showcases how the Lightning Network runs. It's very quick. And in essence, when you look at the integration of Lightning into some of these wallet apps, the functionality is pretty straightforward. And I think the key here with any of these being integrated as a payment tool, this has to be super easy for the average person. And at some point, you're going to need this in the capability of scale also to be just super simple and also scalable from an application standpoint. In other words, the companies that are implementing Bitcoin as a payments architecture being Lightning in the future. So very cool stuff. You can send money all over the world in less than a second. Much better experiences than the bank. This is kind of the big knock on, I think, the existing ecosystem out there. It's been built over the last 30 years. It's dated infrastructure, old code, kind of patchwork together to be able to deal with the modern, society. I even argue this on our own services, like our own Crypto Power Index. We've been wanting to accept Bitcoin for quite some time, but many of the cases is the companies that we work with in terms of our clearinghouse for just our regular credit card usage, they aren't yet up to speed with being able to implement Bitcoin and other cryptocurrencies as a payment architecture. That's the problem that has to be overcome, because those are the ones that are typically holding the keys to the kingdom. That's companies like Stripe, that's companies like Visa, MasterCard, American Express, and then you have all the platforms who've implemented those merchant services into use cases, which means if they don't kind of adopt it, or they get a pushback from those platforms saying, hey, listen, we really need to go in this direction, or we start to see maybe a few upstarts come into the game and start to change the way it turns out. Now, when you look at the Lightning Network, there's a few things that you have to understand, and there's a really good post by Lynn Alden here, and they kind of go about the explanation of what it is and kind of the overall. And I'm going to break it down for you a little bit here to give you a little bit more context of it. But basically, what they want to do was examine the topic of how Bitcoin has evolved as a medium exchange. More broadly, analyze the order in which new monetary assets can be accepted. Now, there's two different layers of how this can be done, and even the US dollar kind of falls in this way. And one thing that they really focused on these summary points, and I think this is a good article to read if you guys want to check it out, it's over on Swan Bitcoin, but in order to create it, this was right from the article, in order to create a truly digital bearer asset, kind of like a bearer bond, that is useful for payments in the long run, it also must be attractive to store of value. So a meaningful percentage population begins to persistently hold, and in some percentage of their liquid net worth, and willing to accept it for goods and services. That pretty much establishes it's an actual currency. It can be used for goods and services. Bitcoin started with more of a smart design from the beginning. It created an underlying digital golden settlement network, but it wasn't necessarily in the layer of using it for payment just yet. On top of the foundation, Lightning as a payment network is now being developed, and that has reached critical mass of liquidity. That, again, is a key factor here. Now, volatility is the other aspect that's inevitable along the path of monetization. New money cannot go from zero to trillions without upward volatility. Good explanation of why and what we're seeing within the aspect of Bitcoin, because Bitcoin does have volatility, it does have store of value. It has all of the elements that are, in essence, very similar to what she and they explain here on Gresham's law being applicable here. And Gresham's law, if you don't understand it, it's not too complex, but they're basically saying there's two types of money. There's money on the top end that's more store of value, and then there's money that's used in kind of the bottom end that you wouldn't keep your assets in long term, but it's used for monetary goods and services and trade. That's the aspect of the money system that really is trying to be explained. The exception is for a subset of people who specifically need Bitcoin Lightning's permissionless nature for one reason or another, for whom the majority of liquid net worth is in. So again, this gets back into kind of where the strength of Bitcoin is going. Payments really have a potential, and I think a lot of people argue that whether or not Bitcoin is even designed for payments, because of Lightning, that has kind of become a pretty significant opportunity. Now, you've got two things happening. You've got the Lightning Network scaling, then you have Ethereum over here going to the merge. And in reality, Ethereum has been and has had a knock on it. It's, its transactions per second are not that great prior to what we're seeing potentially with the merge and outside the assistance of layer 2s, which are something like the Polygon network. But when you look at what they're trying to say in this article here is kind of move over Ethereum. This is where Bitcoin's Lightning Network could potentially really become a suitor. Now, I would argue this to a certain extent. There are a ton of things that you can do within the Lightning Network. There's a lot of different small apps and functions. Even one of my favorite use cases is the Podcast 2.0 use case, where you can utilize Lightning to actually gift and or pay creators on podcast Satoshis and be able to do that on the fly within the ecosystem and the app itself. That's something that I do think that could evolve in the area of use case for Bitcoin and how Lightning will be integrated in. A couple of things, though, that they point out right here. This is Arcane Research suggests that there's 3 events that catapulted Lightning user base from modest 100,000 users right now to 80 million potential users in a matter of months. And a lot of that was Cash App. We know a lot of that because of the use case in South America. But also, I think the potential here of starting to go into some of the other aspects around the industry in terms of the app. So here's 100 flashes of Lightning. These are the ecosystem. Let me zoom in on that one a little bit for you guys. So you can kind of see a little bit here on nodes as a service, wallets, banking as a service, the neobanks, which I think are going to be interesting. We've talked about those, Chivo, Cash App, BitNob, and some of those have been on our show before. The other area I wanted to, liquidity services. This is going to be another one that I think will start to grow. And the other ones that I think will be interesting is going to be this whole rewards and earnings area. This will be interesting because it will, anytime you have payments, you need those kinds of functional aspects around rewards and earning, especially in the sense of Lightning, because of the fact that it needs to scale to hundreds and hundreds of millions before it, I think, becomes a real threat to any kind of payment system out there, for sure. All right, now, the improvement of the Lightning Network, increase in applications, ease of transactions on Bitcoin. You're going to see a lot more commercial activity. This is talking about, Anthony Scaramucci kind of getting to this. Okay, yes, Bitcoin is going to go to maybe 300K a coin. It won't matter where you buy it, but it does matter to a certain extent. 20K is much better than a 60K purchase. But the point is that scalability is within reach, I think, at this point. And that has been something that a lot of people have argued around Bitcoin for quite some time. And I say not for Bitcoin, but against Bitcoin as a use of payments. So that, I think, is going to be different. Now the question is, can Ethereum 2.0 beat the Lightning Network in the race to scalability? That's still a question mark. We haven't seen the merge. The merge could change a lot of things. We've talked about this before and what this might look like. The gas cost alone within layer 2 could be just almost insignificant. And if that is and becomes reality, Lightning, I think, will have a little bit of a challenge because of the depth of the ecosystem within Ethereum and what that means for where it's going in terms of Bitcoin overall. Also, a couple things here. Lightning Network theoretically can handle almost an unlimited number of peer-to-peer transactions per second. This, again, came from that article that Lynn Alden wrote over on Swan Bitcoin. And there is an argument for this. And it's not that it's a bad thing, but the good part of this is that, for me, when I look at technology that's in the, kind of in its infancy, because that's really where Lightning is, it's in its infancy, is there's a lot of things that they can still fix and still evolve and build and maybe even rev, meaning get new revisions of that particular platform and be able to take it to the next level. Because there is arguments around this, and I want to showcase one right here. This is researchers that discovered vulnerabilities in the layer 2 Lightning Network. And let me explain a few of these, because these are real. And one is called a zombie attack. This is essentially a form of vandalism that congests the network, which makes it basically unusable. We've seen this happen, these kinds of attacks, in other network systems out there. I won't name names. You guys know who they are. The other thing is this whole double spend attack. That has the potential. It still has some scenarios that could play into this. And then the watchtowers roll. This is another problem. And then the double spend attack. This is the one that they think would be disastrous for the network. And there are scenarios that play into this. You go further into the research on this, and this is an article that gets into a little bit more detail around its shortcoming and its kind of vulnerability. So, and there's a few key points here. So, payment network has no persistent ledger. That's true. So you've got to have reliable records for accounting. So, in their opinion, unsuitable for business or any kind of legitimate non-casual payments. Would agree. Any kind of things that you would need some sort of ledger compatibility. The argument I would have for that is that most of the ledger systems that are enacted within ecosystems that had already been out there in payment systems for quite some time are usually done natively, and though they may connect to a ledger of sort within our credit card processing system or something of that nature, in many cases they're done in a native environment, meaning they're doing it within their own accountability of selling of that product. So that may start to work itself out, I think, overall, but do a checks and balance always needed. It is a situation. Payments also are executed off-chain, but in a trustless manner. This is an inherent contradiction. I get that. Expiration times are long in order to maintain the network capacity. That's a problem. It's inherently unable to recognize where payments originate and then where they're going. This is kind of a disconnect from the chain itself. Again, another argument there. Relationship between the network and underlying block, BTC, is fundamentally discordant and corrupt. That one I'm not sure enough about, but the point is that participants think that they have just a facade. Basically, it's like a bolt-on. And this is an argument around, and has been around, the Lightning Network. Now remember, Lightning Network is still a very young, as I said, a very young group of developers, and not necessarily in age, but just in time on project. And that in itself is something, especially in an emerging field like what we're dealing with right now in true crypto payments. This is something I think that we will have to see advance to the next level for sure. The other thing that probably is the biggest concern to me is his item 7 right here. And this is how it's basically requiring anonymous multi-parties and multi-hop transactions, which leads to these violations and a lot of financial laws and regs. And this includes the BSA, which is the Secrecy Act. This is a part of FinCEN, and it's also part of the whole scenario around AML, anti-money laundering. So this would have to be something that would be solved, because that would be one of the biggest scenarios of it being able to scale at any kind of huge level. You have to be able to meet the rules and regulations, at least of FinCEN and some of these bank secrecy acts that are already been in place and have been in place for quite some time. So all of that plays into it. Now, you've got Ethereum over here about to merge, and you've got Lightning scaling, and you've got Bitcoin as the power player right now. Of course, that may change a little bit as we start to see a little bit of the Ethereum merge maybe and possibly cause the flipping that we talked about earlier this week. But Ethereum will outpace Visa with its ZK EVM rollups. This is something that we've talked about here about Polygon and its ability to really kind of reinvent how finance could be done, at least in terms of the payment architecture. All of this is at a very critical time right now, especially around when you think about what's happening just in general of traditional finance and payments. This is a very, very interesting time. And Bitcoin and Ethereum are at center stage right now, being potentially viewed as a real payment architecture in blockchain that could supplant, completely replace the existing system as we know it today. And you're thinking, and just think about this. I mean, we were talking about this earlier with Mark Yusko, and one of the statements he made was $35 trillion essentially is what's being skimmed off the current banking system overall. Imagine that much. That's how much juice is in the system. So the potential here is massive. The problem is adoption and all of the curves that we need to see the industry start to kind of finagle, including regulation and all of that. So still good news overall, I think, for payments, Bitcoin, Ethereum. The real question is who's going to win this race, because sure, there could be the Visa MasterCard kind of, angle on this, maybe, or more like Visa American Express. But I think there will be multi-chains out here that actually do well with it. This was a tweet we showed earlier in the week, but Vitalik Buterin said that after the merge, gas fees could be as low as 0.002 with rollups. And again, they're talking about the ZK rollups similar to the Polygon scenario. But because that Ethereum has so many developers and so many dApps, the likelihood of Ethereum may be coming with a real use case scenario and then plug and play. Once they get past all of this merge scenario in terms of the dev side, Ethereum could be the one that wins that race. And it's still, this is going to be an interesting thing to watch for sure. And it does have a lot of bearing on price, because it will have some bearing on whether or not Bitcoin can hold on or just end up being a true store of value, basically digital gold. And is Ethereum maybe the incumbent in terms of true price action when it comes to being able to handle payments on the blockchain and what that might look like? Both could possibly be in the race, most likely will be. The question will be scale, and at some point, it's kind of like the Diners Club, scenario. There were a handful of credit card companies that just simply outpaced Diners Club, who pretty much controlled the credit card industry in the beginning, in the early days before American Express, Visa, MasterCard really came to the party. So this will be interesting to watch. Now, don't forget, hit the like button, make sure, and also get a few questions in over on the side. I'll give you guys a chance to get some questions in there. And then we'll jump over to our sentiment. I know we have a poll as well. And before we get to the poll, I want to jump into our sentiment. Let me pull up the power index real quickly, just to give you guys some look here, because there is a little bit of movement here right now. And I want to look at Bitcoin and Ethereum. And if you're a CPI member, you guys have access to 29 plus tokens. We do 3 drops a week. The Friday date has already been done. So Bitcoin currently showing a little bit of downtrend right here. So again, this is the first time we've seen that little bit of a dip here. So we've had almost 5 prints in a row since a dip, both on amplification to a certain extent and also on top line sentiment. So we are watching Bitcoin potentially hitting some sideways action or a wall here. Ethereum, same scenario, but it's a little less evident here. Which and remember, Ethereum, we talked about this. Let me zoom in on that. We talked about Ethereum earlier this week, and there's some very interesting things happen, I think, with Ethereum, because it is almost into a point of price discovery. So we'll continue to see how this one plays out. But the fact that we have sentiment and amplification trending slightly down on Ethereum, this is the first time, again, since, what was that, 1st of August? Actually, yeah, 1st of August, we had a slight downtrend from late July. and then it's just been up, up, up from there. So it'll be interesting to watch over the weekend. Right now, we do see this in a downward trend on both ETH and Bitcoin. I want to get to the poll, and then we'll take a few questions here. All right, so which layer 2 solution most likely to be used for payments? Lightning or, all right, so you guys think the ETH is the route. And I think, based on the presentation, I think the point is, sure, ETH's scalability, but I think the other alternative that you have to look at is the merge still has to occur for all of this to happen, where Lightning is actually running now, and it's a matter of scalability within that ecosystem. Now, if merge happens and goes off without a hitch, and all of the EVMs plug right in, and all of the potential rollups come to play, and then all of the dApps that play into the ecosystem benefit from this, now you got basically a transplant of an entirely new system for potential use case on low fees, fast transactions, and widely used. So that's been the big knock with Lightning, is the scenario of not necessarily widely used just yet, still under what is 100 million or so in terms of overall use. So I think that will be a factor as it plays out. So everything, all eyes on September, because that merge will, I think, dictate at least the near future for who is going to win this race, if there is going to be a winner for sure. All right, let's get into it. Do you think this is a dead cat bounce coming in from Tahunas? The dead cat bounce, I'm assuming you mean AED. I don't know this one. Don't know that token. I can tell you right now that we've been watching a big jump on a lot of tokens. If you follow our 20K portfolio, we actually dropped, well, we talked about this. We had 5 tokens that we had purchased, some of which we've exited out of our positions. Near Protocol is one. That thing was up almost 38% since we had bought on that from our 20K portfolio. Chainlink was another one. Avalanche we exited out of. And we're holding cash now, looking for some new re-entry points. But we weren't able to get on some of these runs, like on Ethereum and even on Bitcoin to a certain point. I'm still holding a little bit on Bitcoin, but I may raise my price on Bitcoin in terms of doing a buy-in on those. Drew, being able to buy goods and services with a stablecoin seems to be more understandable and adoptable solution by the masses. Again, see, now that's a good comparison, Drew, because back to what Lynn Alden was talking about is that there's going to be 2 entities here, I think, within the ecosystem of crypto. If you think about the value of dollars and then a value of investment classes that you can utilize. Now, granted, stable is most likely just the alternative to the dollar because it's obviously pegged to the dollar, so it is the digital dollar. Whether or not we see, kind of that adoption level, but most people will understand it that way. The cool thing is when people start to utilize more of these assets that become more stable, which I think will be Bitcoin and Ethereum, as essentially a use case for being payments. And an example for me is if I could accept nothing but crypto, I would, without a doubt. And even knowing the volatility is there, because remember, unless you're dealing with a kind of a first in, first out kind of scenario on your cash flow or your balance sheets, you're in most cases already setting on assets anyway, because most of them are dollar assets that are going down versus something like a crypto asset, which could be volatile going down or volatile going up. So the benefits are there for businesses to potentially go in this direction. What makes you think the merge will ever happen? I've been in since 2011. It's always pushed. Plus, they have the dollar and the resources, and it's not happened. So I think the argument is there. My position, if you watch my show often, that I'm always skeptical of these technologies because I've been in the tech business for a long time. I know how hard it is to get something out to market, to ship a product, so to speak. And Ethereum is being able to do something that I think I have not quite seen developers at this scale. Now, granted, it's kind of like all hands on deck, and it's kind of a must-win position for them. So I do believe there's just so much talent and so much focus. They're going to hit the merge. The question is when. September is the question mark for me. I still think September is a little loose, even though people are still pointing to September as a potential. Remember, that's just a few weeks away. So again, very cool. So what do you think about the Near protocol token? We love it. I mean, it was on our 20K portfolio. We just exited the position, but it's still tracking up. And the only reason we exited was because we needed to take profits. So, and that's something too, guys. If you're not taking profits right now, like on Ethereum, if you're not taking profits and you were in a good position, and I think on the mastermind group we gave out data on when to take profits on Ethereum. And right now is the zone in which I'm doing it. And it's a great opportunity if you're in the right position at the right time. If you were in on this last buying spree, you know, when Ethereum was around 1,000 to 1,200, you are in heavy profit zone right now. Don't get caught holding the bag up there at the top. All right, Leighton, just think if ETH never got that free pass, this conversation would all be all about XRP. Another kick in the XRP. I don't know about that, Leighton. I still think XRP has a tremendous opportunity. And I just, you know, I think Ripple in general it's a product that I think is going to remake society when it comes to financial. And what Ripple is trying to do from a global perspective in terms of partnerships, it's just a matter of time for these guys really on hook. Remember, that's the banker's token. And when the banks start really rolling in, guess who's going to be right there with them, kind of buddy. So, and you may not like that, but that's going to be the fact. Al Duckworth, once BlackRock dips into BTC, we all win. Yes, that's already happened. All crypto will moon, regardless of where you hang your investment. I would agree with that. Most of it will come. The question will be if some of the projects can make it, one, through the regulatory mismatch that's going to be coming at them, and then two, if they've got enough runway in terms of value, or just cash to be able to pay their developers, etc. For sure. Next crypto for payments will emerge from nowhere. See, that's a good one right there, Dino, because I do agree that you could see an unknown really make it into, because remember, we're super early right now. We're kind of fighting out amongst the weeds, the barbarians, so to speak, very small markets, not necessarily big adoption, and kind of small land stakes that we're trying to claim rights to, versus if you get into some of these markets where the bell curve starts to accelerate, and that's when those guys come in and pluck off the potential marketplace for sure. Congress being much too tight on tax-free crypto payment legislation. That's just a matter of time, I think, before we see some loosening of this. Eventually, smart regulation will come to its senses, mainly because lobbying and also, unfortunately, the situation of how lawmakers are incentivized to make decisions will start to play its way into DC. This is coming. It's just a matter of time, for sure. Let's see here. We got an institutional payment system will never be built on a blockchain that still does upgrades. They'll want a decade of no upgrades before they even look at it. Okay, I would say that is not going to be the case. And here's why crypto meme. This would be my argument. Every major system in society that has built, including the banking system, ACH, SWIFT, all of those have had their day of crashes, congestion, problems, but they are built good enough to get the system moving, and then developers are constantly band-aiding it. That's been a scenario for a very long time, including operating systems in which that run these, whether you run Apache servers or you're running OS, or you go all the way back to Microsoft and some of the suites that we use for enterprise computing. All of that was built in knowing that we had update after update after update coming. And eventually you get to a threshold of stability. And I think that's all that they need, is a stable system. There's going to be crashes. There's going to be downtimes. There's going to be congestion. But getting to a stability scenario, I think, will be the key. Whoever does that first wins this. That's how and why Microsoft owns the enterprise space. It's really why and how, if you look at it outside of the database side of things, when you look at software as a service, you get outside Oracle and maybe into Amazon with AWS, just in terms of what they've done. That's my point. You get to a stability level, and eventually somebody starts to really kind of take the control of the market. Question is who that's going to be. That's a big one. All right, so lots going on here. We're going to try to get you guys another live stream out. We've got some stuff coming on XRP. Don't want to miss that one. And of course, there's some new information, I think, around the aspect of where XRP is heading. A little bit of news on that we dropped just this week about XRP and their interest in some of the Celsius products out there. Reason for that, watch that video because we break it down on the whole aspect of the exchanges. It was called, I think, Exchange Chaos or something in terms of the title. But check that video out. If you're over on the podcast right now, make sure and jump over here on the YouTube channel. This is where we get it all done. It's where you guys can catch all the insights. You get a chance to see our CPI data. We catch all the interviews of the CEOs and the devs. All that happens right here. Of course, if you want to reach me, it's out there on Twitter at Paul Barron. We'll catch you next time right here on TechPath.